Be me, Harvey. Just another cog in the corporate machine. My job is basically staring at spreadsheets until my eyes bleed, finding patterns in data that nobody really cares about, but looks good in a PowerPoint presentation. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. For a few years, life was predictable. Clock in, do the work, clock out. The office had a decent vibe. My corner of the floor was quiet, mostly guys in my department just trying to get through the day. My closest work buddy is Kendrick. He's one of those guys who is deeply cynical about everything, but hides it under a layer of dark humor. You know the type. Sees the world for the soul-crushing joke it is, but at least he's laughing. There's also Saint, a girl from the adjacent department. She's cool, normal, doesn't treat office interactions like a battleground. We'd grab coffee sometimes, complain about deadlines, simple stuff. The ecosystem worked, no drama, just quiet, productive misery. Then our old manager, a guy named Frank, who basically just approved time off requests and forwarded emails, finally retired. For a few weeks, we were adrift. It was bliss. No one watching over our shoulders. We knew it wouldn't last. One day, we get a company-wide email introducing our new department head, Camilla. The email had a picture, professional headshot, sharp blazer, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her bio was a masterclass in corporate buzzwords, synergizing departmental workflows, fostering inclusive paradigms, actioning a forward-thinking culture of dynamic change. I showed it to Kendrick. He just stared at it for a full minute, then slowly shook his head. He said it looked like an AI was tasked to write the most meaningless mission statement possible. The first day she arrived, the entire atmosphere of the office changed. You could feel it. The air got heavier. She walked through the office like she was inspecting a military barracks. She didn't say hello to anyone, just gave these quick analytical glances into each cubicle, taking mental notes of who to put on a list. Later that day, she scheduled a mandatory, all-hands-on-deck meeting for our department. We all file into the big conference room. Camilla is standing at the front, next to a whiteboard. She waits for everyone to be completely silent before she even starts. She starts talking about her vision for the department. It wasn't about productivity or meeting targets. It was about deconstructing the inherited patriarchal frameworks of our workplace. A few of the guys exchanged confused looks. She said our department had, in her words, a stale, male-centric energy. She wanted to implement changes that would promote a more equitable and emotionally intelligent environment. Kendrick was doodling something on his notepad. I glanced over. It was a gallows. She went on for nearly an hour, talking about microaggressions, unconscious bias, and toxic masculinity. It felt like a lecture from a college course I never signed up for, and definitely didn't want to attend. She kept looking at the men in the room as she talked about these things. Like we were all case studies. She said that to truly build empathy, we needed to move beyond abstract concepts and into practical application. We were all dismissed, feeling weird and unsettled. Over the next week, a bunch of little changes happened. Motivational posters with bizarre corporate feminist slogans appeared on the walls. A woman's place is in the boardroom. Okay, sure, whatever. Smash the glass ceiling and the patriarchy. A bit aggressive for a Tuesday morning, but fine. Then she scheduled a follow-up mandatory meeting. The mood was tense. We all knew this was where the other shoe would drop. We file back into the conference room. Camilla has a box on the table next to her, a plain cardboard box. She starts by saying how pleased she was with our receptiveness to the new cultural direction. Then she says it's time to implement her first major initiative. She calls it the Walk a Mile policy. She explains that men can never truly understand the systemic disadvantages women face in society and the workplace. We carry a privilege we're not even aware of. To begin to understand, we need to be confronted daily with a fraction of the female burden. She opens the box. Inside are smaller, company-branded pouches and stacks of tampons and sanitary pads. The room went dead silent. You could hear the air conditioning hum. She announced that from now on, every male employee in the department would be required to carry one of the pouches at all times while on company property. Each pouch contained a selection of feminine hygiene products. She said it wasn't about using them, it was about carrying them, to feel the weight of them in our pockets or bags, to have them present in our minds. to be constantly reminded of the biological realities that our female colleagues face, realities that, according to her, the workplace was designed by men to ignore. There was a moment of pure, unadulterated disbelief. I looked around the room. Everyone's face was a perfect mask of, what the hell is happening? One guy, a quiet coder named Mike, actually raised his hand. He asked very politely if she could clarify the purpose of this, as it seemed unrelated to our work duties. Camilla gave him that smile again, the one that wasn't a smile. She told him that his question was a perfect example of male privilege, the inability to see beyond one's own narrow experience. She said the purpose wasn't to be comfortable, the purpose was to be uncomfortable, to feel a sliver of the discomfort women feel every day. She also mentioned that HR had reviewed and approved the policy as a forward-thinking diversity and inclusion initiative. Checkmate. There was no escape route. The meeting ended. She had an assistant hand out the pouches as we left. It felt like being issued a ball and chain. The men just kind of shuffled back to their desks in a daze. I sat down and just stared at the little pouch on my desk. It felt monumentally stupid, humiliating even. Kendrick came over to my cubicle. He wasn't laughing. He just looked angry. He told me he was going to HR. An hour later, he came back. He said HR told him that Camilla had their full support and that if he had a problem with the policy, maybe he wasn't a good fit for the company's new cultural direction. It was a threat, wrapped in corporate speak. That evening, a few of us went to a bar after work. The mood was grim. People were talking about quitting, about looking for new jobs. We felt completely powerless. If you complain, you're fragile and toxic. If you refuse, you're fired. We were backed into a corner. Harvey was just stirring his drink, staring into space. Then Kendrick, after being silent for a long time, suddenly looked up. He had a strange glint in his eye. He said, "What if we don't refuse? What if we embrace it?" We all looked at him like he was crazy. He laid it all out. Her power comes from us resisting, and her labeling that resistance as toxic. But what if we don't resist? What if we comply? What if we comply so hard, so thoroughly, and so publicly that she's the one who has to tell us to stop? A plan started to form, a ridiculous, beautiful, idiotic plan. Malicious compliance. The next day, the mood in the office was different. The dejection was gone. It was replaced by a quiet, nervous energy. The pouches were on every guy's desk, not hidden in a drawer, but placed right out in the open. Camilla walked past and gave a small, satisfied nod. She thought she had won. The first move was small. One of the guys, Tim, who works in logistics, had one of the sanitary pads, one of the big ones with wings, stuck to his desk right where his wrist rests for his mouse. He was using it as a wrist cushion. Camilla walked by his desk. She stopped. She stared at the pad for a good 5 seconds. Tim didn't even look up, just kept clicking away at his spreadsheet. You could see the gears turning in her head. He was technically carrying it. It was on his desk. He was using it for an office-related purpose. She couldn't say a word. She just tightened her lips and walked away. A small victory. Later that day, Kendrick took it a step further. He was walking back from the break room with a cup of coffee. He had one of the tampons, still in its plastic applicator, tucked behind his ear like an old-timey journalist with a pencil. He walked right past Camilla's glass-walled office. He made sure to turn his head so she could see it. I saw her look up and just freeze. Her eyes narrowed. But again, what could she say? You're not allowed to store the mandatory item behind your ear? The whole thing was too absurd. A silent war had begun. The next day, things escalated. A few more guys started using the pads as wrist rests. It was becoming a trend. One guy had a small leak in his water bottle. He very theatrically wrapped a sanitary pad around it, securing it with rubber bands. Amazing absorbency, he declared to no one in particular. Camilla was starting to look permanently annoyed. Her walk became faster, her glances sharper. I decided it was my turn to contribute. I waited for a moment when Camilla was walking toward the coffee machine. I walked over to her, holding a tampon in my hand. I put on my most sincere, concerned face. I asked her for a moment of her time. She stopped, looking impatient. I held up the tampon. I told her I was taking the initiative seriously and wanted to fully understand the product. I asked if she could explain the difference between regular and super absorbency. I said I was worried about getting a nosebleed due to the dry office air and wanted to be prepared with the right tool for the job. Her face was a brilliant work of art. It was a tidal wave of conflicting emotions: shock, disgust, anger, and the horrible realization that I was playing by her rules. She couldn't call me out for being inappropriate because I was framing it as a genuine question about the mandatory items she herself had forced upon us. She just stammered something about reading the box and practically ran away. Kendrick gave me a slow clap from across the room. That afternoon, we had a team meeting. Kendrick sat right next to Camilla. Midway through her presentation, he let out a huge theatrical sneeze. He then reached into his pocket, pulled out a sanitary pad, unfolded it with a loud crinkle, and proceeded to blow his nose into it. He then folded it back up and said, "Wow, these things really do hold a lot. Great initiative, Camilla." The room was silent, except for one of the other guys who poorly disguised a snort as a cough. Saint, who was sitting across the table, had her head down, but I could see her shoulders shaking with silent laughter. Camilla's knuckles were white as she gripped the edge of the table. She looked like she was going to explode. She just said, "Let's stay professional, Kendrick," in a voice that was shaking with rage. He replied, "I am just utilizing the company-provided resources." The policy was starting to backfire on her in ways she could never have imagined. She thought she was teaching us a lesson about empathy. Instead, she had armed her entire male workforce with an unlimited supply of officially sanctioned absurdity. The creative uses for the products became a daily challenge. One guy used the adhesive strip on a pad to stick notes to his monitor. Another unraveled a tampon string and used it to tie up a bundle of cables. They were becoming the ultimate multi-purpose office tool. We started having conversations in the hallway, loud enough for Camilla to hear. "Hey, you got a spare pad? The light flow one? I've got a smudge on my screen." "Nah, I've only got the overnight heavy flow ones. Might be overkill." Camilla started spending more and more time in her office with the door closed. She would only come out when absolutely necessary. Her grand social experiment was turning into her own personal nightmare. She had tried to create an environment of female-centric understanding. Instead, she had created an office full of guys making endless, deadpan jokes about menstrual products. I ran into Saint by the coffee machine. She looked at me, a huge grin on her face. She told me that Camilla had been complaining to some of the other female managers via email. She said Camilla wrote that the men were weaponizing her policy against her and engaging in malicious compliance. The best part was, the other managers apparently told her that since she got HR to approve it, it was her problem to manage. Nobody wanted to touch the mess she had created. She was trapped. If she canceled the policy, it would be an admission of defeat. She would lose face completely. But if she let it continue, the mockery would only get worse. Her authority was eroding day by day. She had tried to assert her dominance and ideological purity, but she had underestimated the sheer, stubborn creativity of a dozen guys who had been pushed too far. We weren't just fighting a stupid rule anymore. We were fighting for the simple right to come to work and not be treated like subjects in someone's bizarre social experiment. And we were winning. The atmosphere among the guys had never been better. We were united by a common, absurd cause. The quiet nods in the hallway, the shared smirks when someone came up with a new, ridiculous use for a tampon. It was a strange kind of brotherhood, forged in the fires of corporate insanity. Camilla had wanted us to understand the female experience. Instead, she had accidentally supercharged the male bonding in the office to levels she couldn't possibly comprehend. The ultimate irony. We knew she was plotting something, though. She was too proud to just give up. We could feel it. A storm was coming. She was just waiting for one of us to slip up, to cross a line from malicious compliance into actual insubordination. But we were careful. Everything we did was perfectly, infuriatingly by the book, her book. The stalemate lasted for about a week. It was a Cold War fought with cotton and plastic applicators. Camilla tried to reassert control by burying us in work. She sent out emails at all hours, demanding reports and setting impossible deadlines. The message was clear: get back to work and stop this nonsense. But it was too late. She had already given us the tools for our own amusement. The more pressure she applied, the more creative we got. Kendrick became a sort of modern artist, and his medium was feminine hygiene. He started creating little sculptures on his desk. One day it was a small dog made from a tampon with the string as a leash. The next, it was a surprisingly detailed swan with the wings of a sanitary pad fanned out gracefully. Camilla would walk past his desk, and you could practically see the smoke coming out of her ears. But his productivity never dipped. He was meeting all her new, ridiculous deadlines. He was doing his job and complying with her policy. He was untouchable. She decided to try a new tactic, a direct confrontation, but disguised as a helpful check-in. She scheduled one-on-one meetings with every male employee. My turn came on a Thursday afternoon. I walk into her office. She tells me to sit down. She has a notepad and pen. She's in full manager mode. She asks how I'm acclimating to the new departmental culture. I told her it's been an eye-opening experience. I said that I felt my empathy levels were rising daily. Her smile was so forced it must have been physically painful. She then tried to corner me. She asked if I felt that some of my colleagues were perhaps not taking the spirit of the policy to heart. She was trying to get me to rat on the others, to break our unity. I just played dumb. I told her that everyone seems to be engaging with the policy in their own unique way. I mentioned Tim's wrist rest, saying it was a great example of ergonomic innovation. I brought up Kendrick's sculptures, calling them a powerful form of product-based expression. I was feeding her own corporate buzzwords back to her. She couldn't argue with her own vocabulary. The meeting was a complete failure for her. She realized we were a united front. There were no weak links. Her frustration was becoming more and more visible. She started making little passive-aggressive comments in team meetings. If a man presented an idea, she'd ask if he'd consulted with his feminine intuition. We just started agreeing with her. Yes, Camilla, I did. And my feminine intuition says this is the most efficient way to structure the database. Every attempt she made to mock us was turned back on her. She had created a monster she couldn't control. The next big escalation came during a departmental presentation. A guy named Dave had to present a quarterly report to the whole team. Dave was usually a pretty shy, quiet guy, but even he had been emboldened by the whole situation. He gets up to the front of the room, project on the screen. He's using a laser pointer, but it's taped to the end of a long plastic tampon applicator. He's using it to point out bar graphs and pie charts. He never acknowledges it. He just presents his data as if he's holding a normal pointer. The sheer deadpan absurdity of it was breathtaking. Camilla, who was sitting in the front row, just sank lower and lower in her chair. She had to sit there for 30 minutes and watch a man use a tampon applicator to explain Q3 revenue projections. After the meeting, she sent out a furious email. The subject line was, "Clarification on policy. 10B, professional conduct." The email stated that while the walk a mile policy was still in effect, all company-provided materials must be handled in a manner befitting a professional office environment. It was a desperate move. The language was intentionally vague because she couldn't explicitly ban the things we were doing without admitting her policy was a joke. Kendrick immediately saw the loophole. He sent a reply-all email to her and the entire department. His email was a masterwork of corporate trolling. He wrote that he was grateful for her clarification and took the issue of professionalism very seriously. However, he continued, since there was no precedent for professional male use of these products, he was concerned that he might inadvertently violate the new rule. Therefore, he requested that she provide a detailed guide, with illustrations if possible, on the approved professional handling techniques for each product. He asked if there was a preferred way to hold a tampon during a meeting. He wondered if sanitary pads should be kept in the left pocket or the right pocket for optimal professional appearance. He finished by saying he looked forward to her guidance so the team could remain in full compliance. Camilla didn't reply. She had been backed into an even smaller corner. She couldn't produce the guide because it would be insane, but she couldn't ignore the request because it was a valid question about her new rule. She was completely paralyzed. From that day on, anytime one of us wanted to annoy her, we'd just email her a polite question about the professional handling guide. Dear Camilla, quick question. Is it considered unprofessional to use the adhesive strip on a pad to remove lint from a suit jacket before a client meeting? She never answered a single one. A few weeks went by like this. The tension just kept building. We knew something had to break eventually. One afternoon, a manager from another division, some guy from finance, came over to our section to ask about a report. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw our desks. He saw the wrist rests, the cable ties, Kendrick's latest sculpture, a small castle, complete with a tampon string flag. He looked at us like we were a cult. He slowly backed away and went straight to Camilla's office. We saw him through the glass, pointing at our desks and talking animatedly. Camilla just kept shaking her head, trying to downplay it. This was the first sign that her containment of the situation was failing. The absurdity was starting to leak out into the wider company. That evening, Saint sent me a message. She had overheard Camilla on the phone. A huge potential client was scheduled to visit the office in a couple of weeks. They were a big old-school manufacturing company, very conservative. The deal was worth millions. And Camilla was personally in charge of giving them the office tour and the final presentation. This was it, the end game. Kendrick and I gathered a few of the other guys in the break room after most people had left. We told them the news. The client was coming. This was our chance to end this, once and for all. We weren't going to do anything that would get us fired. No harassment, no destruction of property. We were just going to follow Camilla's policy to its most logical, most absurd conclusion. We were going to create a departmental art installation, a monument to empathy. The next 2 weeks were a flurry of quiet, clandestine activity. We'd stay a little late, come in a little early. We pooled our company-provided resources. It was the most motivated and collaborative I had ever seen our team. One guy was an amateur artist. He took the lead on the visual elements. We made a large welcome sign for the entrance to our department. Each letter was carefully cut out from the absorbent core of dozens of sanitary pads. It was actually quite well done. Another guy, the one who was good with his hands, worked on a centerpiece. He took a big piece of styrofoam and hundreds of tampons. He painstakingly created a large, intricate sculpture that looked vaguely like the company's logo. Kendrick's project was the most ambitious. He took over the large whiteboard at the back of the department. He created a massive workflow chart. But instead of boxes and arrows, it was a complex web of pads and tampons of different sizes, all connected by their own strings. He labeled each part with corporate jargon. A heavy flow pad was high-capacity data input. A slim tampon was agile project delivery. It was utterly meaningless, but looked incredibly complex and serious. My contribution was simpler. I took charge of ambiance. I made dozens of little paper crane-style birds, folded from the plastic wrappers of the pads. I used the tampon strings to hang them from the ceiling tiles so they floated gently in the air conditioning drafts. By the morning of the client's visit, our department was transformed. It was a surreal landscape of weaponized corporate foolishness. We all got to our desks and just went about our work as normal. We didn't speak about it. We just waited. Around 10 a.m., we saw them. Camilla, walking with 3 older men in expensive conservative suits. She was leading them down the main corridor, pointing out different departments. Her voice was cheerful, but we could see the sweat on her brow from across the room. She was visibly trying to steer them in a different direction, to bypass our section entirely. But the main conference room was on the other side of our department. There was no other way. As they got closer, you could see the exact moment the lead client, a stern-looking man with gray hair, noticed our welcome sign. He stopped walking. He squinted. He took a step closer, then another. His face went from curiosity to utter confusion. Camilla's cheerful chatter died in her throat. She started saying something like, "Ah yes, the marketing department, a very creative bunch, always thinking outside the box." The man wasn't listening. He walked slowly into our department, his 2 colleagues following him like lost ducklings. His eyes scanned the room. He saw the floating wrapper birds. He saw the tampon sculpture of the company logo. He saw men at their desks, calmly working, with sanitary pad wrist rests. His gaze finally landed on Kendrick's magnificent whiteboard of madness. He walked right up to it. He stared at it for what felt like an eternity. He leaned in to read one of the labels. Agile Project Delivery. He turned around, very slowly, to face Camilla. His face was no longer confused. It was cold. He looked at her and asked a very simple, very quiet question. "What is this?" Camilla started to panic. The words just tumbled out of her mouth. It was a train wreck of corporate speak and panicked excuses. It's a paradigm-shifting empathy-building exercise, a hands-on, multi-sensory experience. We're deconstructing workplace norms to foster a more inclusive. It's about synergy. The man just held up a hand to stop her. He looked around the room one more time, his eyes lingering on the faces of me, Kendrick, and the others, who were all pretending to be deeply engrossed in our work. Then he looked back at Camilla. He said, "I run a factory with 4,000 employees. We build engines. We don't have time for this." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The contempt in his tone was enough to freeze the room. "I think we're done here," he said to his colleagues, and with that, they just turned and walked away. Camilla stood there, frozen, in the middle of our masterpiece of maliciousness. She looked utterly, completely defeated. The tour wasn't even halfway done. The multi-million-dollar deal was dead. We didn't cheer, we didn't even smile, we just kept working. The silence was our victory lap. It took less than an hour. We saw the regional director and the head of HR marching down the hallway. They didn't look happy. They went straight into Camilla's office and closed the door. We couldn't hear what they were saying, but we didn't need to. 20 minutes later, the door opened. The director and HR head walked out. Then came Camilla. She was carrying her personal box of things. She wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. She walked the longest, most silent walk of shame I have ever witnessed, right through the department she had tried to reshape in her image. Past the welcome sign, past the logo sculpture, past the empathy birds. And then she was gone. The head of HR, a woman who had previously told Kendrick to suck it up, stopped at the entrance of our department. She cleared her throat. Effective immediately, she announced to the room, the Walk a Mile initiative is terminated. She then turned and left without another word. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Kendrick stood up. He walked over to his absurd whiteboard. He picked up an eraser, and he wiped it all away. That was the signal. Silently, we all started to dismantle our creations. The welcome sign came down. The sculptures were disassembled. The birds were unhooked from the ceiling. We took all the tampons and pads, all the pouches and wrappers, and we threw them in the trash where they belonged. Within 10 minutes, it was like it had never happened. The office was just an office again. Kendrick walked over to my desk. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. I nodded back. We had done it. We had faced the abyss of corporate insanity and stared it down. The next day, we had a new interim manager, a guy from another department. He came in, said hello, told us to just keep doing our jobs, and left us alone. It was beautiful. The peace and quiet felt earned. We had been pushed, and we had pushed back. Not with anger or insults, but with the very tools of our own humiliation. And we had won. The spreadsheets on my screen never looked so good.